Alright, so today I'm with DaHanG, a Quake Champions player for Team Liquid. So he's won the Sacrifice Tournament at DreamHack Denver, Sacrifice Tournament at DreamHack Winter, Dual Tournament at DreamHack Winter for 2017, 2v2 at DreamHack Tours, 2v2 at QuakeCon 2018, and 2v2 at DreamHack Winter 2018. So how are you doing, man?
Doing good. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure, man. So, for my first question, so that's the one I usually start with. Where does your username come from?
So, this was like 15 plus years ago. There was a lot of kids at school that just started saying like, dang. So, in various contexts, right? So, I just thought it was a funny word. And then I put an extra H in there for emphasis, so it's like, dang. It's really silly, but that's the origin of the word. It doesn't mean the hang.
Okay.
It means dang, yeah, with an extra emphasis. It's kind of ridiculous.
It's actually pretty cool, I think.
Yep.
Alright, so now, going into Quake Champions. So, regarding Sacrifice, I was wondering, how was it for you, like, starting to play Sacrifice, compared to, like, playing Quake Live? Were you immediately interested in this game mode, or was it with time, like, you started liking it?
Well, when I first started playing it, I thought the idea behind it was pretty awesome, to be honest, because it's very similar to Capture the Flag, but instead of a flag, you have a soul, which is basically a ball, realistically. That's the way I kind of view it. It's like a ball that you can pass to teammates or throw away from the enemy to make life harder for them. But it had elements that... It was still different from Capture the Flag because you couldn't just have a set defense player, a set offensive player, a set mid player, because you needed to fulfill all those roles at various points in the game. And so in that respect, it made it more dynamic. And that was actually like one of my strengths going back to Quake Live CTF was the ability to kind of like play a little bit of everything, because I was never like the flashiest, best offense player, even though I did play a lot of offense in Quake Live CTF. But I could kind of, you know, time items and just be a nuisance all around, whether it was on O or on D. So I fit right in nicely into Sacrifice because you needed to play a little bit of all the roles. You needed all four of your players ideally on your team to play all the roles pretty effectively. And so, yeah, I mean, right away, right when I started playing it, I thought this was a pretty awesome game type.
Okay. So how did Quake Champions Sacrifice compare to Quake Live CTF, like in terms of teams, in terms of roles, and like overall playstyle?
Well, again, I'd say the main difference is you had some set D players and some set mid players in Quake Live CTF that you couldn't have in Sacrifice. In Quake Live CTF that you couldn't have in Sacrifice. And there was a little more coordination that I felt was needed too because of the abilities that you had. Like you're saving your ability for a power-up. Whereas in Quake Live, you didn't have that. You go to the regeneration or you go to the quad at a set time. And so those are the two biggest differences, I would say, going from Quake Live CTF to Quake Champions.
So yeah, something you just mentioned that I had forgotten is that in Quake Live, it wasn't protection that was being used in CTF, it was regeneration. So how would you say the two compare, and how would you compare the effect of those two power-ups?
Well, I would say protection is stronger overall for the team collectively than regeneration was going back to Quake Live CTF, because it's much more common in Quake Champions that you kill yourself on purpose if you're really low on health and you just give it to a teammate that has a much bigger stack. And especially in Sacrifice, I mean, deaths really don't matter too much. You're not playing for kills and deaths per se. You're playing to capture the obelisk, to get to complete the objective. And so in Quake Live CTF, what I noticed a lot of teams or a lot of players would do is they would get the regeneration, and they would just keep it even if they're low. They would just hide, let it regenerate. And what was actually interesting about the regeneration in Quake Live CTF is I forgot the tick rate, but when you were less than 100 health, I think it was like 15. So you'd go from like 15 to 30. Don't quote me on that, but I do remember once you got over 100, like it would only be going up to like 105, 110. So your rate of value decreased as your stack increased.
Okay.
But yeah, I think protection was, if it's kind of comparing apples to oranges, but I feel like protection is a more valuable item in Quake Champions than regeneration was in Quake Live.
All right. So now regarding your team, so Team Liquid for Sacrifice, how were the roles split inside the team? How did you guys like decide on who would do what during the matches, and prior who would pick set champions and all?
Right. So the roles really revolved around the champion picks, as you're kind of alluding to, because no one could play only offense, only defense, etc. So in the beginning, so going back to the summer of 2017, we had myself, Rapha, Wins, and ID. And none of us had that crazy strong like CPM movement anarchy background. And with that being said, it ended up being Rapha who took that role initially, and he still did a great job playing the character of Anarchy. So he was set to that. I was playing Clutch and Slash, depending on the map, but actually for QuakeCon specifically, Clutch got really nerfed. And so he kind of became unusable because his health went down to 100 and his armor stack went up to 150, but at only 100 health starting, like Sorlak still had 150 health to start, so Clutch kind of got thrown out of the meta. So I was playing a lot of Slash at that point in time. And then ID was playing Sorlag because you kind of still needed that beefy character that had a lot of air control and movement to whiz around the map. And Wins was playing a lot of Nyx and BJ at the time, and I think it ended up settling on Nyx. I think that's the way the meta kind of evolved at that point in time to kind of be that more that mid player that just does tons of damage but is still always there to escort and always there to be ready for the power-ups. That's kind of the way the whole team kind of ultimately meshed with their roles.
So now, at QuakeCon, in Sacrifice you had a really good performance, but unfortunately Team Liquid didn't win the Sacrifice tournament. It was 2Z, so Claus, Xeron, Sal, Sep. Not sure who the last one was, but yeah.
Latromi.
Yeah, Latromi, thank you. So yeah, the European team. But then after this, DreamHack Denver and DreamHack Winter, Liquid was unstoppable, that no team could stop you guys. And so I was wondering, what do you think helped you go from being basically just the best team in NA, but not the best team in the world, to being absolutely dominant in this game mode?
It's a few things, I think. So number one, myself, really the whole team. So Rapha, myself, Wins, ID. We actually didn't start playing Quake Champions like regularly until like second or third week of July, which was like maybe 4 or 5 weeks before QuakeCon. I don't remember the exact dates, but we were still playing Overwatch for Team Liquid and not playing Quake at that time. And once we heard about, you know, such a huge tournament, then we were like, wow, we got to get in on this. But we started playing a little bit later. And so there's an element of rust and then learning a whole new game type and learning all new maps. So I don't want to like use that as an excuse, but it wasn't just like we were just hopping into Quake Live CTF and we're familiar with all the maps, we're familiar with everything. Like we're learning half of a new game to an extent, all new maps, new game type. So there's that element, but then also just playing against the North Americans, we weren't playing at a fast enough pace as Stacked and 2Z were at the time. That's the way it felt when we got to actually playing on LAN. It was like we felt like we were playing the game mode correctly and optimally, but there were times we were just overrun. Like, we were just getting out deathmatched, and the speed at which 2Z was playing was kind of on another level, and we just weren't ready for it. I don't think we had the experience to like handle it at that time. I mean, it's such short notice to like adapt and play against a team that you really haven't been exposed to that yet. So that's why I think ultimately, I think we only got top 4 at QuakeCon, like 3rd/4th. But then once, you know, we started understanding how the game is played and the speed at which it's played and just getting more experience, I think it just naturally we were able to continue to excel and keep improving, whereas teams like 2Z and Stacked didn't really continue that progression the way we did.
So what exactly did you work on after QuakeCon in order to get those victories at the following sacrifice tournaments?
It's kind of hard to say because it's a little bit of everything. So I would say number one, I think we actually, because we got Waz, ID basically retired and we got Waz instead. So because Waz was going to be that anarchy runner, I think that freed up Rapha to play a little more of a shot caller role, which actually helps us more collectively as a team, because when you're anarchy, you're so focused on your movement and just trying to be the hero all the time, not necessarily seeing everything. And I think that freeing up Rapha to be more of a shot caller, just in terms of like what are the important items coming up, where do we need to be, that kind of thing, that made us as a unit stronger. And then I just think the natural progression of getting more reps in, learning the game, we still had a higher ceiling to get to that we just didn't have enough time to reach at QuakeCon 2017. So,
so now, going from Sacrifice to 2v2, how was that for you? Like, how did you decide on who would play with whom? And basically, how was the adaptation for you going from an objective team mode of 4 versus 4 players to a deathmatch team mode of 2v2?
I mean, I used to play TDM for years and years and years, so it was nothing to learn from just a game mode perspective. And I figured, you know, it makes most sense on paper to just team up with Rapha. I know Waz was kind of like a little disappointed that maybe he couldn't team with one of us, but it was really the fact that Wins was like still trying to pursue Overwatch. So if Wins was all in for 2v2 TDM, I don't even think Waz would have had a question. Like, Wins is great, an all-time great FPS player, but just worked out the way it did. So teaming with Rapha is obviously like, you can't you can't be upset about that. That's a great situation. And yeah, we were just going to start grinding and keep an open mind about what champions can we use, which champions are good on which map. Let's not look at necessarily what other teams are going to be doing. Let's try to like create the meta ourselves, was kind of how we went going in. And if things are not successful, then we just change it. You know, let's just make sure it's correct by the time a big LAN event happens. So I knew going in we had the right mentality. It was just going to be a matter of getting the practice in and executing.
So now, excuse me, comparing 4v4 TDM from Quake Live to 2v2 TDM in Quake Champions, what do you say is the impact of the fact that there are twice less players? How did you feel that in your approach to the game mode?
Well, I think when there are twice as less players, that means obviously your individual impact is greater, but that also means now that you have your abilities as an added component to Quake Champions that wasn't there in Quake Live, your use of the abilities is that much more important as well. And then you want to make sure you have your ability ready for protection, and you want to make sure your ability is ready for quad. Now, obviously that's easier said than done, but I would say that's the major difference, and kind of that dynamic of using your abilities either like literally for quad that second, or like that second prior, or using your ability like 7 or 8 seconds prior just to be set up in a good position for the quad, just to be set up for the protection. Whereas obviously in Quake Live, I mean, you're just DMing it and you're trying to get that positional advantage, but that's all you have is the positional advantage. Maybe more guns, but you don't have that ability either.
All right. So regarding the abilities, in preparing them in order to get the power up, is that something that you would also do in Sacrifice, or was in Sacrifice abilities more centered towards the objective?
It depended. Like for Nyx, for example, like if there's protection, using Nyx's Ghost Walk to get the protection and then invis out, or to come out of invis and just pop right on the protection, like that's obviously huge. So like her value when it comes to the objective of like a soul of using invis isn't that strong, but for the protection specifically, it's very strong. But then, you know, like Scalebearer's Charge, it's good in both cases, like using his Bull Rush to throw the soul and then charge into it and then keep going and have that reduced damage, or to just collide right into opponents, getting the protection or quad. So it really depended on the champion, but it's such a dynamic game that you want to like kind of trust your teammates to use the abilities appropriately and not have like a set rule per se, because sometimes you want to just use your ability just to keep all your guns and just escape. If you have like, you know, lightning gun, railgun, and rockets, a death that at that point in time is more costly than if you just have, you know, starting shotgun. So you really don't want to have these hard rules. They're more like guidelines, and then through your experience, you got to just use it as you see fit.
So now talking about the way you played 2v2 with Rapha, one thing that I think a lot of people were surprised, myself included, was the fact that you streamed basically all your scrims with Rapha, all your 2v2 scrims. So what was the idea behind this decision? Because at the same time you had the major teams in Europe, so that was Xeron and Toxic and Claus and Silent were
right.
basically like super silent, like they would take part in as little online tournaments as possible. And they would, just scrim between each other and not reveal it to anyone. So, but on the other hand, Team Liquid, so you and Rapha were just basically like showcasing all your communication, a lot of the strategies. So yeah, what was the idea behind this?
It's kind of two components. One is like, don't worry about other teams. Just focus on yourself. Is kind of the mentality Rapha and I have. Is let's improve. Let's not worry about like what are we exposing to enemy teams. Let's just worry about ourselves. If we're improving, we can just constantly adapt. And then the second thing is like Quake is such a dynamic game. Like these split-second decisions are things like you can't really just teach, right? Like you can't like say, oh, go hide over here. This is a set strategy, and then this will happen because you did X, Y, or Z. It's like everything is so dynamic, and your decision making is different every single game. That I just feel like exposing how you're playing, you're not really giving much away, right? Because Quake is so fast paced, and I don't know, it just doesn't feel like you're giving other teams an advantage by showing you how you're playing. You know, it's just the way I feel like it. I think with Quake, it's such a straightforward and fast-paced game that there's nothing to worry about. Just stream it if you feel like streaming it, whatever.
Okay. So now going back to DreamHack Tour, so as a lot of people know, the meta back then, like more or less given by your performance with Rapha, was Visor and Galena. So I was wondering, how did you come down to this? Was it just like, did you try all the champions and saw what worked best, or
pretty much. I mean, we knew they were strong, but the question was more like, are they so strong we need to use it every single map, or can we get an off pick in certain maps? Like Doomslayer, for example, was still pretty strong on Blood Covenant and still pretty strong on Blood Run because of his passive double jump. But at the same time, Galena and Visor just felt like so strong that it's safe to just use them the whole way through. And at that point in time, champ bans were not in place, so that made the most sense to just keep using it. We did use Strog on Corrupted Keep, and I think we even used it on Awoken, if I remember correctly, because those were like narrower maps, and at that point in time, you could instantly get into the kamikaze mode. That's what I call it. I don't even know if that's the official name of it, but you know, you get Peeker out and you can instantly go super fast with it. So you just double click your ability and immediately Peeker is off to the races. So you could do that quick 100 damage if you hit a direct, and then you get the passive Destroyant if you get the kill. So there's a lot of value in there if you can execute Peeker correctly. So yeah, we were able to put him into a couple maps as well, but that's pretty much how we came to it. You know, practicing, seeing what works, and we determined that we couldn't go too out of the meta. Like Strog was the only champion where we really could justify throwing him into the mix in some cases.
So regarding Peeker, so yeah, we all remember your crazy Peeker shots with him, though, all those crazy kamikaze moves. And a lot of people after this tried using Peeker and realized that it was actually like really fucking difficult to control him when he's going so fast. So I was wondering, like, how did you manage to basically master him so well and become like the #1 Peeker in the world? Did you go in like into empty maps and like practice flying around, or was it just with experience?
It was just through experience. I mean, the hardest part about Strog and Peeker isn't so much like guiding him in his kamikaze mode. It's more making sure you're safe when you're in that kamikaze mode, because I mean, you learn from experience that you're only safe for a couple seconds max usually, if you're lucky. So sometimes you even have to just, you know, suicide your Peeker because it's so dangerous to just be sitting there, especially if you're like 200 health. You just get double rocketed and you just lose everything. It's so costly. But the actual, you know, the Peeker, you know, guiding him through maps and stuff, no special like training or tricks, just actual reps playing against teams. I wasn't, you know, spending hours in a server by myself finding special places. It's pretty intuitive, you know, and yeah, pretty straightforward.
So now, going into QuakeCon, how did the meta change for you? How did you adapt to all the balance? Because there was a lot of time, because DreamHack Tour was in May, if I recall correctly, and QuakeCon was August, I think. Is that it?
Yes, May and August tour and
so
QuakeCon. Yep.
And in the meantime, there was basically nothing, just only online cups. But the game kept on changing and having different balance patches. Right. I think I remember, was it at that time that like all the heroes were normals to 100 HP, or was that...
By the time QuakeCon rolled around, yes, all champions had 100 HP.
So how did that affect your champion choices and overall play, such a drastic meta change?
Well, yeah, there was a big impact because now it wasn't just Galna Visor and a little bit of Strog. I would say BJ became a very viable champion. Clutch was very viable as well, but there were champ bans, so you didn't see a whole lot of Clutch at QuakeCon. Still, I think the Galna Visor was still overall very strong and very like safe, if you will. So you still saw a lot of teams running that. But yeah, I think the biggest change, and there was a good chunk of Ranger and a little bit of Doom. Like it was a better kind of situation where there was like 5 or 6 possible champion picks depending on the map, as opposed to like 2, 2 or 3. But there was a lot of BJ going on, like, because he was very strong. His passive was strong and his ability was strong with that double damage at the time. So that was the major change, I would say, from just a champion meta, like what's going on between Tour and QuakeCon. All of a sudden, BJ is really strong and could basically be justified as a pick on every map, because if you remember, like you could even dual wield rails, and it's like rail, rail, rail.
I think
Like
it's times
good.
2.
Yeah, and it lasted like 6-7 seconds. Like it wasn't like the 4-second like reduced time either. Like so he was really really good. So really that was the big change going forward to QuakeCon. There was like 5 or 6 champs, and BJ was his time to shine.
So, one thing that surprised me in one of the changes that we saw going from DreamHack Tours to QuakeCon 2018 was that Tempest Shrine was added to the map pool. So it's quite a different map because of how big it is, like compared to other 2v2 maps like Blood Run. So, like, how was it for like? Where do you think this decision of adding Tempest Shrine comes from? Because I don't remember seeing any requests for it, and like how did you adapt? And generally speaking, like, what do you think of this map as in 2v2?
Right, so Molten Falls came out, and so that made the map pool go up to 6, which doesn't really make sense. So I think they wanted to get a 7th map in there. So then it was going to be like, okay, does Veil of Nath get in, or does Tempest Shrine? And I think neither are like ideal choices. But it seems like I think there were like some internal like votes that like some of the people from Bethesda were doing to see like what does the community think, and I guess they decided Tempest Shrine collectively was like more popular than Veil of Nath, and so Molten Falls and Tempest Shrine were then added to the QuakeCon map pool, and I was just never a fan of Tempest Shrine as a 2 versus 2 map because it's just so large. And then you have that room, which we call the Jenga room, which I think people are familiar with. It's where the heavy machine gun is, and there's a big kind of cylindric block. Well, it's not a cylinder. It's like a rectangular prism with a small armor on it. And that whole room doesn't really serve too much of a purpose from like a 2 versus 2 standpoint. It's kind of like you go there and there's not much going on, because that was like a previous base for in Sacrifice, which makes sense for Sacrifice. But yeah, for 2 versus 2, I just think it's too large of a map. But it is what it is, and got to play it. And we ended up doing well on it. It ends up being one of those maps where just being on the same page as your teammate is even more critical, because you at least have more time, because it's such a large map, to kind of group up, right? Kind of like attack an area together, or kind of explore a little bit. Like, can we go out to LG to see what's going on, then come back to Heavy? So there is that element. And in the grand scheme of things, because it's only 1 map out of 7 that's so large, I actually don't really mind it in totality. Like I've always been a fan of like diversity within a map pool. So I've always been a fan, like going back to the Quake Live days, of like we have like Aerowalk, which is like a small fast map, but then we have like Lost World, which is like a larger slower map. I've always been a fan of kind of like a mixture of styles. So I think in the grand scheme of things, it's okay that it was in there. Not my first choice, though.
So now that we're on the topic of the 2v2 map pool, I'd be interested in knowing, like, what do you think overall of the different maps that are currently being played in 2v2? Because I remember Rapha saying that he really enjoys Awoken, that he thinks it's like the best v2 map. I think he said that a little while ago. But like, generally speaking, what do you think of the 2v2 maps? Like, are there some that you particularly like and some that you like less?
I really like all of them quite a lot, except Tempest Shrine. But I think they're all pretty different in certain ways. Like, good variety. Awoken is a much smaller map, and just there are sometimes like the way fights can arise, they seem pretty inevitable, and it ends up being just a lot of just raw deathmatch. Still got to be smart with it, but it just seems like so many of the fights are pretty unavoidable. Then you got maps like Blood Covenant, where maintaining rail control and just keeping high ground is very important. Then you got Corrupted Keep, where there's no rail at all, and it's just a short, fast map where, like, if you can team up attack a mega at the same time and do a quick 2 versus 1, that can go a long way. So yeah, like I'm a big fan of just the map pool in general. There's a lot of like for good variety, different approaches that like certain approaches and certain fights are more valuable on like map A than map B. So yeah, that's exactly what I kind of look for in a map pool where there's good variety and like the dynamics in like the quad room are different on some maps than others. Like sometimes it's a wide open space, and then in other spots it's like on Blood Run, like it's kind of tough to get there to where the quad is, and you got to set up early. So yeah, it's really good variety, and I'm a big fan of the current 2 versus 2 map pool.
Right, awesome. So now the other thing that was changed from QuakeCon, from DreamHack Tour to QuakeCon, was that they added champion bans. So I was wondering, what did you think of this change, and how did you adapt to it?
So I think the change was a very good change but there's 2 reasons. One, you don't want to have a very like a kind of a stale meta at a tournament where like everyone is running Galena Visor, which is what happened in DreamHack Tours essentially. So it kind of prevents that from happening, because once you ban one of those 2, now what do you do, right? And of course that coinciding with other champion balances change that had already arrived at QuakeCon, it just added some interesting dynamics to play, because you might ban, you know, Clutch versus one team, but then you might ban Visor versus another team. Like the ban isn't going to be the same every single time. So there's just going to be a lot more variety in champ bans, and a lot more interesting matches from that respect. So I was very in favor of the champ ban being added to the rule set. And I think it's also good just to ensure if there's ever like literally a single champion that becomes just a little too powerful, you have that you know, ability to ban it. As I'm reminded now of like Vu with the Banarchy thing.
Yeah.
But I think it just makes sense. You know, it's fair. Now we got a list of what, like 15? I don't even know the exact count, but there are like a lot of champions now. They've been adding like one every 3 months or something. So it's not like banning a single champion shouldn't really like destroy your whole strategy, but it might hinder it a little bit, but then you have to adapt, but then you get to ban something from them that can hinder them. So it creates good dynamics, I think, especially in the 2 versus 2 setting.
So how do you decide on which champion you ban? Because of course, when you ban a champion, it also means that you cannot play it. So yeah, what was the process of deciding, like for example, which champion you would ban against, what was it, Xeron and Silencep, or against Causing Toxic, against Avic and Kilson? Like, yeah, how did you generally decide on this?
So in general, like with Rapha and I, we want to make sure that whatever gets banned on us, it's a non-factor, because we feel so strong with the ability to like just choose a different champion than was banned. So that's like kind of our approach. From the enemy team banning us, and then when it comes to us banning something from the enemy team, we try to just do whatever it was that takes them most out of their comfort zone. So, or something that was just so dangerous that we didn't want to mess with it. So for example, like I would say like Razy's Clutch is so dangerous, like we just don't even want to mess with it. Let's just remove that, right? And then there might be something like we feel like maybe like Cooler is so strong with Galena and the way he can kind of pick and choose his fights, and you know, just be comfortable with that champ in general. Like we would want to take it away from him, for example. So that was kind of the approach. Let's be okay with anything that's banned our way, and let's make the enemy team less comfortable heading in.
So now, actually, I was just reminded of something. The final change that we actually saw also from DreamHack Tours to QuakeCon 2018 TV2 was that, from what I remember, DreamHack Tours was pretty much best of 3 all the way, and the grand finals was best of 5, whereas for the playoffs in QuakeCon, it was best of 5 and the grand final was best of 7, right? So how did that? Did you?
I think that's correct.
Do you think that like this changed? Did you notice or did you adapt to this somehow? Like regarding the stamina, how did it? Because it meant that you would play more, right? So did it change something for you?
I mean, ultimately, I don't think it did, but I think playing more maps helps us because I think one of the things like Rapha and I do best is trying to stay focused and keep the motivation level high and never let, you know, like burnout become an issue because it's like I even remember going back to DreamHack Winter last year with the Sacrifice and Duel tournament, like because I was able to get so far in both of those tournaments, I played like the most amount of matches, but I was like telling myself like still give your 100% A game no matter what. Like if you're exhausted after, it's fine, but make sure you give 100% going in. And so the same thing with like QuakeCon earlier this year, playing more maps in the playoffs and even having a best of 7 grand final. It's like you got to just I think just the mentality going in of staying focused and having that stamina through gives us a little bit of an edge than maybe other teams. I think other teams, it is hard to keep that edge every single map. Like try to not make any mistakes, try to convey all the information to your teammate and not just convey it, but receive and react quickly to the information you're receiving. It's one of those things that just keeps adding up. Every extra minute of gameplay is like an opportunity for more mistakes to be made or mistakes to be prevented. So the more you feel like your team collectively has that mental edge and the ability to stay focused for a longer period of time, you're going to have better results. So yeah, going to best of 5 and then best of 7 in the QuakeCon finals, I think that actually ultimately helped us.
So now, I was wondering, yeah, do you know why? Because for DreamHack Winter 2018, yeah, we just saw this tournament. For Duel, the grand finals was best of 5, and for 2v2 it was best of 7. Whereas the fact that I think that Duel actually has a 7 map pool as well. So do you know why that is? Why Duel is BO5 in grand finals and 2v2 BO7?
I honestly don't know. It may have come down like literally to just amount of time you have to broadcast. It might not have been like a competitive rule set issue. It literally might have been, you know, there's only so much airtime they have to fill, and you know they need to move the show along. But that's just an assumption on my part. I honestly don't know. I think as long as it's at least best of 5, I think that's like good from a competitive like point of view. Best of 7 is even better, but as long as it's best of 5, I can't really complain.
All right. So now, one thing that we haven't mentioned that is like super important, that is often pointed to as the reason why you and Rapha succeed, and of course it's not the reason, but it is probably the most famous and the one a lot of people talk about, is your communication. That basically just stunned a lot of people seeing that at DreamHack Tour, how efficient you were with the callouts, how despite the fact that the exchange was super intense, you would keep on, telling where you are, timing the items, telling it to the other, trading the, give the callouts on where the enemies are. So something I'm wondering is, how did this come from? Is it something that you guys like already had from your experiences before with TDMs, CTF, Overwatch and all? Or was it something that you guys had to basically build up? And also, did you have some inspirations like from other teams on all those callouts and how efficient you are with it?
Well, so going back to Quake Live for me personally, it felt like you didn't need as much communication. And I'm not saying that's correct, but I'm saying just thinking back, I remember we were basically just calling like item timings and like, I'm leaving the base high, you know, like I have the flag, I'm going high, help me low, things like that. But it was never like non-stop the way Rapha and I kind of pushed the 2v2 communications to in more recent times. And I think Rapha got some pretty good experience with just communicating like a lot of information quickly, honestly, from Overwatch, because he ended up evolving into the primary shot caller for Overwatch, and that game, like, shot calling is like so critical, and there's so much to keep track of. So, and I don't want to get too into that game. But yeah, I think that honestly helped him build up that skill set leading into Quake 2 versus 2. And then it became one of those things where, like, it might be a little counterintuitive. Like, maybe you get information overload, or maybe you're talking so much that you can't hear critical sounds, or maybe you're just talking so much that you're not able to focus on fighting. Like, you can't just talk all the time, right? You still have to hit all your jumps, hit all your shots. So, but I think just ultimately, like, it felt like the more you said to each other, the better it was, because you're giving the opportunity for your teammate to react. Like, maybe he's going to go for a mega health because I say the time is 34, but then at like the 30-second mark, I realize he's going to be jumping right into a 1v2. So we say concede mega, something like that. And so, like, every bit of information that you can get and every bit of information that you can convey, it's another one of those things. It just adds up. You have a higher probability of making better decisions based on that. So, and I think just Rapha's ability he just has like the ability to kind of multitask so well. Like, I can do it really well, but I feel like I need to have like really good sleep and like caffeine and things like that. But he's just like, doesn't even matter the circumstance. Like, he's always on top of it. So, but yeah, I think this last year has proven how critical communicating effectively in 2 versus 2 is.
So now, regarding your approach to the game mode, how do you decide on who does what with Rapha? How do you decide like who takes a certain weapon, certain item, who goes in at which moments? Yeah, like generally, how is it decided? Because in 2v2 compared to like CTF, you don't have those clear roles. You don't have to attack the defense because it's TDM. So yeah, what's the idea behind this?
So typically, I will be the guy that will be getting most of the items if they are already secured. If he is so weak with like 20 health, but he has all guns and it's secured, then we'll let him have it. He plays more of that scouting role that's like kind of like in between a major item and the enemies, and trying to just feed information and still obviously play like optimally based on that. And then but most of the time the game is so fast, it's just whoever gets it, because we learned like kind of early on, sometimes you think an item is secure and then 2 seconds later the enemy swoops in and steals it, and it's like that, and just that one steal can literally cost you the whole game. Like, it doesn't necessarily, but it really can. So a lot of the times, like, we both understand, like, it's okay if it looks like one of us is greedy and just getting all the items, but it's almost like the purpose is to deny the other team the item, more so than, like, having yourself have such a massive stack. And then for, like, quads and protections, it's kind of the same thing. We don't want to say, like, okay, it's secure, I'm getting. Sometimes it is, but most of the time, just jump on it. It's so dangerous to just leave it hanging out there, because like all of a sudden like they can swoop in and steal it, or you get a bad rocket bounce and now you have it with like 20 health. So it's one of those things, again, like alluding to earlier, there's no hard rule. It's more like a guideline. Like, I'll be the guy that kind of gets the items and tries to just piggyback and like benefit the most off of his communication, but he'll be the guy that kind of gives me the items and tries to do like safe damage to the opponent in the meantime.
So now regarding 2v2, we don't know if it will stay as a competitive team mode with CTF, which was just released on the PTR. But in case it stays, are there changes that you would like to see, whether it be on like just the overall meta, the weapons, what could it be, just yeah, or just the game mode itself?
Well, the game mode itself, probably not. I think it's perfectly fine. I think it's very fun, and I think it makes a lot of sense just having 2 versus 2 in Quake Champions. You get to, you know, showcase like multiple champions in a game, which makes things interesting. You get to, you know, fight for like quad and protection. Just all the traditional elements. I'm a big fan of. I think maybe when you hit that 50 frag limit, which I'm fine with the 50 frag limit, I think it'd be good if like they could show like a replay of that.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it just cuts to like the victory screen and you might not know exactly what happened. So if they added something like that, I think that would be welcomed. In terms of like weapon balance and things like that, the only thing I kind of have a problem with is the starting machine gun, which I think is just so strong. I think it can mow you down, and I feel like it should just be a little weaker, because at 9 damage a tick, it'll eat you up if you're caught in the wrong place. Whereas it's a starting weapon, I feel like it shouldn't like destroy you, which in some cases it feels like it does. So that's the only real issue I have, and it's not a huge deal. Yeah, I think 2v2 is in a pretty good place, to be honest.
Okay. So did you get to try CTF, which was just released on the PTR?
Yeah, I actually did. I played for the first time yesterday for like 2 or 3 hours. So yeah, I tried it out.
So this is probably a bit too early to ask, but do you think CTF should become the competitive team game mode?
I would welcome it. I think the problem is you want to have something that is team-based, that is competitive, because Duel is such a hardcore game type that you're not going to attract a huge player base with Duel only. Like, you need people playing something with their friends that, you know, you can build a player base around, right? So whether that's 2v2 or capture the flag, I'm fine with it either way. The one thing I noticed, based on my very small sample size of playing only yesterday for a couple hours, is it feels like some of the flag captures can really add up quickly. I don't know if that is because there was poor defense, but I feel like in an ideal state, at the end of a match, the final score is like 4-3 or 3-2 or something like that, like kind of low scoring. You definitely, like, I feel like if it's like 16-12, that's just so many flag captures that are going on that it just almost feels a little too chaotic and like crazy, you know? So I don't know really what should be implemented necessarily to fix that, but I feel like in an ideal state, the flag captures shouldn't be like over 10 total at the end of a match. Like, maybe just have maps that are much bigger. Like Citadel was what we tried yesterday, and it wasn't a huge problem on Citadel, but some of the other maps, you know, that were sacrifice maps traditionally are like smaller, like Ruins. I feel like the flag caps are just so fast, and they can add up quickly, and I think that might not be the best like spectating or even playing experience if it's that easy. So maybe larger maps, or possibly a combination of like, once you get the flag, like your speed is nerfed by like 10% or something like that, you know, something where it just makes it a little more challenging to actually finish the job and get that capture in. I really don't have like a final answer, and it's so early, but ultimately I'd hope that it's a little tougher to make those flag captures.
So are there some sacrifice maps that you think would work well with CTF?
I think maybe the larger ones, like the one that kind of comes to my mind is Burial Chamber. That might work pretty well. I don't really have like a built-in bias against symmetrical versus asymmetrical maps. I just think because in Sacrifice you had to sit on the obelisk for 3 seconds, like 1, 2, 3. That seems actually like a long time in the world of Quake, right? So that's why it was harder to just like instantly end these games and sacrifice and reach that 100% tick meter. In Capture the Flag, now you can just sweep right in or swoop right in and boom, you have the flag, right? So I think because Burial Chamber is a large map, I think that adds to its ability to play Capture the Flag correctly. But again, I'm kind of just hypothesizing because it's so early. So, but in general, I think larger maps make more sense for Capture the Flag.
So while we're hypothesizing, yeah, whatever you said, which champion do you think will be the most played and the most meta for CTF, if it is once again competitive?
Well, again, I would have to go with the assumption of like what the current champion mix is today, because there have been a lot of changes and a lot of welcome changes as the balance has gotten better and better. But I think the light champions like Slash and Anarchy are very good. Sorlag is very strong because she can actually like get boosted like unintentionally. Like you rail Sorlag in the butt and boom, she gets that extra speed boost now, and she has the stack to be able to tank that rail. Scalebearer is good, mainly because of his bull rush and his starting stack. I think, you know, his kind of like his movement where you can hold forward and gain that speed and keep it going. I don't think that's going to add too much to his ability to play Capture the Flag. But then the medium champs are pretty good too. Like I think Visor would be very strong, just giving his team like information and being able to track down like who has the flag, things like that. So it's hard to say. I think like in today's state, BJ may not be very good. Strog may not be very good, but I would say like 8 or 9 champs, like most of the champs should be viable. It's just tricky because you really do like Slash. You start with no armor, and in one of the previous patches, she started out with 25 armor. This was like a year ago. She started out with like 25 out of 50, and the fact she used to be 0 out of 50, then she went to 25 out of 50, so her cap was the same, but just having that extra 25 armor off the spawn made such a huge difference because, again, in CTF, deaths don't really matter per se, and being able to just, you know, play for that objective with that extra starting armor helps. But again, now the light champions don't have armor, so it's like raw speed, which is very... has a lot of utility in Capture the Flag. So, but it's like, I don't know how ultimately the meta would be. Like, do you literally run 2 lights and just try to like out-skill people with raw speed and mechanics? Or do you need to just, every time you respawn, do you need that extra 50 armor or 100 armor, and so you only run 1 light, maybe even 0 lights? It's so hard to tell, which I think is a really good thing. Like, the fact that I don't know how the meta is going to be is a good thing, because that means it's time to test and play and see how it works out. And it probably means as well that there may not be such a hard meta. There may be the ability for certain teams to run, you know, X, Y, and Z, and then other teams to run A, B, and C. So really looking forward to see like how it evolves.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, are there some specific changes from Sacrifice that you would like to see in CTF?
Not really. I think the mode is good. Trying to think like...
Because, like, for example, I think I remember it was Razy mentioning that having an in-game ban system would be useful to prevent people from spawning with a champion that was banned, basically. Because, like, and also seeing, but I mean, that he told me like that was regarding Slipgate, because like Slipgate is round based, so like whenever you pick a champion that you're not supposed to, you need to forfeit the round. So I don't know like how much that impacts on CTF.
Right. Like I think that would be fine to add some sort of like a hard fixture into the user interface that dictates what champions you can and cannot play. That would definitely be welcomed. But I think again, like the core issue would just be making sure that the maps are either large enough or that there's like a speed nerf when you have the flag or some sort of nerf. I really don't care what the ultimate outcome is, but I just don't think it would be great if we regularly see scores of like 16 to 14 and things like that. I just think that's too much going on and too chaotic to be like a spectator friendly esport to view, So whatever the solution is, I'm open to it, but I think scores that are reduced is a better approach.
All right. Let me just see my questions. Okay, yes, one question I forgot to ask you before we went on to CTF is that if 2v2 stayed at the competitive game mode, something I'm quite wondering, because seeing how dominant you and Rapha were, getting 3-1 at DreamHack Tours, 4-0 at QuakeCon, and 4-0 again at DreamHack Winter during the grand final against the best European team. What do you think it would take for a team to beat you in 2v2? And do you think like that's actually possible?
Man, I mean, if Rapha and I kept our edge and like kept practicing and stayed on task, I think it'd really be more me managing my other job and making sure I still have enough focus for 2v2. Because actually what happened coming into DreamHack Winter was I honestly felt, I would say the week prior to DreamHack Winter, like I wasn't really where I needed to be. I needed to kind of catch up to kind of my old self, if you will. And that was because like work was taking more time, and whenever I was practicing 2v2, like I didn't have the mental energy that I should. So finally, when I got to Sweden to boot camp a little bit early, I was able to like 100% dedicate to the practice, which helped so much. So, and then get on the right sleep schedule. So then I was finally ready. Came tournament time, and I feel like AMD at this DreamHack Winter event was not too far off. It was like, so we won Corrupted Keep right away, like legitimately, like it wasn't like a blowout, but it was a pretty close game, but we won pretty fairly. But then Tempest Shrine, like Toxic wasn't with Cooler for the last like 30 seconds of the game. So it was almost like a 2v1 for that last 30 seconds, and then they lose by 1 frag. So what happens if, collectively they were more in sync and it was only 1-1 instead of being down 2-0? Who knows what the outcome might have been, right? I mean, I feel like that might have sucked the life out of them being down 2-0. So I think like the European teams, they're all so strong and they're not very far off. It's just like things like that. If they cut that out of their performances and kind of like just communicate a little bit better, they can beat us. I mean, we've shown all our scrims essentially, and teams beat us not necessarily like all the time, but it's not too unusual for some of the North American teams to take 2 or 3 maps off us in a night. So we're definitely beatable. I think it does. It's one of those things that one of the things that kind of would need to happen, to be honest, is either Rapha or myself need to not be on our A game, which could happen. Like, you have your off days. There are days that I feel like I'm just not hitting anything, and then there are days where I feel like I'm hitting a lot and things are going my way, and it's not. I can't really pinpoint exactly why that is. It's just you just say it's one of those days where things either work out or they don't. So if in combination with one of us not playing our A game, like if I just bring my B game and the European team brings their A game collectively, we're very beatable. But I think the way things have been going, if Rapha and I are both on task, like playing the way we need to play, I feel like we should still be the favorite going into any match.
So for my final question regarding CTF, if it becomes a competitive team mode, which would be the 2 extra players that would be playing for Team Liquid?
Well, that has not been completely determined. First step, I would say, is making sure that there are major tournaments for Capture the Flag, because especially like at my age, like I love Capture the Flag, but I'm not going to dedicate tons of time to it if it's not being played at a major tournament. But assuming that there are major tournaments for it, I'd say Waz has expressed interest in playing, and I'm definitely down with Waz playing with us. And then, so he would be like, he would have to fill that offensive flag running role, because his movement is like pretty insane. His game sense and how to run the flag is really strong. But then I don't know who the 4th would be. There are a lot of names that I think are like great players that could team with us, but I don't know like who is necessarily available and who. So, for example, like I think Wins is a very strong player, and I'd welcome having him back. But then there's also people like Yenum and Vedmedic and Saigib and Brick and like all these guys, but I don't know like what's all happening. Are they going to kind of form their own team? So I would say Waz is the only like sure 3rd, and when I say sure, I mean like on paper he's a sure 3rd, but who the hell knows, right? But a lot of other good candidates, and again, it's also like I just want to make sure too. Like, I want the North American scene, too, to also flourish. So, if there are, like, North American-based tournaments, I'm down to, like, split up the talent as much as possible and have, like, a lot of fun within the scene and have a lot of close games between 5 or 6 teams or whatever, like, the 5 or 6 top teams that end up doing well. But when it comes to, like, having to gear up versus Europe, like we have to bring our best, right? Mm-hmm. So I think, you know, it would have to be me, Waz, and Rapha as the set 3 in preparing for Europe. That's the only thing that's kind of sure in my mind at this point.
All right. So now, before we close this interview, do you have any like final remarks? Some people you'd like to thank or something?
I would just say thank you for having me on and interviewing me and so forth. I wanted to keep this limited strictly to the team modes, because that's what I enjoy so much in Quake, and that's what I've always enjoyed going all the way back to my Quake 2 days. I think Team Quake is kind of where it's at, and kind of where I'm hoping like more of the growth actually comes with CTF in the coming months. I think we really need to build that player base, and I don't think it can attract as many players as Duel is, even though Duel is intense and great to watch. So I would also encourage, like both the North American and European scene, and outside of that, those regions as well, like try to, provide like a positive atmosphere for your fellow Quake players, and like work together to try to like just make everyone collectively having more fun and just growing the scene, because Arena FPS is like where it's at for me. Like once, if someone said, okay, there are no more Quake or Arena FPS tournaments, like I'm saying bye-bye to esports, period. Like I'm not interested in other esports. That's just my personal taste. So just want to like emphasize as well, like let's all work together as a community, kind of just to make Arena FPS successful, because you almost don't know what you got till it's gone, right? Because it's like my favorite game type of all time. So yeah, like that's really it. Just keep the positive vibes going, and thanks again for the interview.